Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of mounted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Any world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Boom! Forgot my shades. Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio/RV dining room, located directly inside America. Welcome back, folks of the interwebs. Once again, your host, JJ Vance here, host of Operation GCD, and perhaps more notably, not the vice president, right there. Anyhow, folks of the interwebs, thanks for joining me here tonight again. I will be your pilot and navigator for tonight's shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And not going to lie to you folks here, I got a real barn burner on deck for y'all tonight. And Operation GCD Sundaze, my tales of true crime and high weirdness that I've experienced on my my GCD adventures. So tonight's tale, the legend of, or actually legends technically, of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. And that you may be thinking to yourself, folks, that your host Double J here is simply just telling wild tales of the cannibalistic, homicidal, kid diddling, psychopathic serial killer that I encountered in Great Falls, Montana, came face to face with back in 2001, and may or may not have served me human meat burgers at his place of employment, Hardee's, the former Hardee's location on Central Avenue in Great Falls, Montana, back in 2000. So that is tonight's tale, but it's not just a tale about that. As Great Falls, Montana, well, this tale actually kind of ties into many topics I discuss here at a lot of tangential connections to other things here at Operation GCD. So the first of which, and the reason why I was in Great Falls, Montana 26 years ago when I got there, my first assignment in the U.S. Air Force. And one of the things that I find very interesting is, obviously when you're dealing with, cannibalistic, kid diddling, homicidal, psychopathic serial killers, you may be thinking to yourself, well, that sounds a bit ritualistic. And I wonder if that has anything to do with a cult activity, going on in and around Bar-Jonah, who in fact, this story goes real deep with him, but let me finish these comparisons to other things, Operation GCD, before I dive a little bit more in those details in tonight's introduction. And that is, if there is a cult activity, or a cult of activity going on around with this fella, or was for that matter, it is an interesting aspect because Great Falls, Montana is strikingly similar to Minot, North Dakota. And any folks listen to Operation GCD here, or perhaps this is your first time listening or watching, and Minot, North Dakota is infamous for activity in and around the Son of Sam case and the Process Church of the Final Judgment relative to individuals such as John Carr from the Son of Sam case, who was stationed at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. And that the missions at Minot Air Force Base and Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls, Montana, are part of the same mission sets and command within the Air Force. So I do find there's a lot of similarities, not only in the size and demographic of both locations, but again, the existence of really the activity and economics in both locations, and that is Air Force business. Notably nuclear business, nuclear business, nuclear missiles, those intercontinental ballistic missiles that thrive on Nazi technology and the solid state rocket fuel invented by, that's a good one, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. The solid state rocket fuel invented by Jack Parsons via magic rituals in the California desert. That guy. That kind of intercontinental ballistic missiles, right? So I do find it interesting in those regards, but those aren't the only connections. Because like I said, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah wasn't always his name. In fact, he changed his name to Nathaniel Bar-Jonah while being locked up in the Bridgewater State Mental Hospital in Massachusetts. And any folks of the interwebs tuned into last week's show, or highly recommend you go back and check that out. Last week's Sundaze, I tell the tales of my interactions and former stalker who wanted to be my public relations representative real bad, Buffalo Jared Revisa. And I'll just give you a quick introduction for those unfamiliar with Buffalo Jared. Here's old Buffalo Jared himself, who now allegedly, by all reports, sits inside the Bridgewater State Mental Hospital in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. The same place where Paul David Brown, I always get that mixed up. Let me double check so I don't get that correct. Too many names. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah and then Paul David Brown. So David Paul Brown, my apologies. David Paul Brown was institutionalized for a series of very violent, sadistic activities dealing with kids over the years, beginning at the age of 5. However, he's institutionalized at the age of 20. And we'll go over those extremely sadistic and violent incidents in tonight's discussion, because there's no reason this fella should have been on the streets, right? Pardon me. There's no reason he should have been able to not report as a convicted sex offender. There's no reason why he should have ever been employed at a elementary school in Great Falls, Montana. And you may be thinking, well, he got lost in the system. I would argue otherwise. His entire immediate family lived in Great Falls, Montana, because he moved there where his father was employed at the Air Force Base after he was released from the Bridgewater State Mental Institution in 1991. Deemed to not be a menace to society, however, within months, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah would then reoffend in the same violent, sadistic manner towards children and be given probation. And in the terms of those probations was he used to go live with his mother in Great Falls, Montana. However, I assure you, after the end of that probations in the mid-90s, circa 96, he moves on his own there in Great Falls, Montana, and lives on his own. However, his siblings and his father has passed by this time, but his siblings and mother continue to live on there. So how anyone's not concerned that this dude's working at an elementary school, that's a different story altogether. But nonetheless, that is where he finds himself in once again, diddling kids and doing sick, sadistic things and killing kids once again here in Great Falls, Montana, when this man should have never been on the loose in the first place. But it is going back to that Bridgewater State Mental Hospital to understand that some of the reasons what I'm talking about, how that man Nathaniel Bar-Jonah should have never been on the loose on the streets, and that is this one statement from 1980. So, like I said, he gets institutionalized there in 77. So in 79. He spends 2 years in prison on a 20-year sentence for trying to kill two kids and kidnapping them both, and diddling them both, and leaving them for dead. One of the kids survived and saved his friend, and they both lived on. But the system failed those victims because Bar-Jonah, he gets moved from the state prison on a 20-year sentence to the state mental hospital in 79, and in 1980. Here is this statement, I think, encapsulates the idea that the system failed and there was no evidence this guy of this, that, and this. And, again, this speaks to greater occult activity, if you ask me, and possibly folks, providing them some top cover. But that quote is as follows from a hospital psychiatrist there at the home of the current residents of Buffalo, Jared Revisa, the Bridgewater State Mental Hospital in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. They said about Bar-Jonah back in 1980, shortly after he arrived, that his sexual fantasies outline methods of torture extending to dissection and cannibalism. He expresses a curiosity about the taste of human flesh. So why in 1991 would they let him out of this place? Why in 1991 would Worcester, it's spelled Worcester, but I think they call it Worcester, Massachusetts district attorney said this guy's not a danger to society and put him on probation after reoffending moments after he left that same state mental hospital. And again, he changed his name back in 84 while he was in the mental hospital. So, these ideas, they don't, like, he just changed his name later. We didn't know where he was. Like, he'd already changed his name. So it should be no surprise when this man shocks a town. Look, looking back, because I was living in Great Falls. It was an alarming experience for the townsfolk of, at the time, I believe, roughly 50,000, with another 7 or so thousand, I believe, possibly 8,000 assigned to the Air Force Base. So it's not a huge city, and it was a pretty tight community. So when the headlines of things that came about relative to this matter, I think folks were shocked, but we didn't have all the information there at the time, right? When I say these things tie into other matters that I like to discuss here at OpGCD, I will be now's a good time to go ahead and mention my new OpGCD Thursdays Patreon, which is available both with both Sundays and Thursdays are available for $10 a month, and or if you don't like either one of these topics, you want to just do a Sundays or a Thursdays, I have those both available for $7 a month. However, this Thursdays, the first volume of OpGCD Thursdays, The Anatomy of Satanic Panic. As you can see here, I've Muppetized Colonel Michael Aquino, U.S. Army Special Forces Green Beret, psychological warfare expert, and founder of the Temple of Set, offshoot of the Church of Satan. And I would argue, based upon the man's own statements, an ardent subscriber and venerator, worshiper, if you will, of Aleister Crowley. So, and I think it is those special forces psychological operations, in part, that has caused us to not resolve these matters today in our society, where folks like Nathaniel Bar-Jonah can go around eating kids, multiple decades, killing kids, diddling kids. These are just some examples of, I think, things that would have, especially at the tail end of what was the height of the Satanic Panic back when this occurred, when he came to justice in 2000. But I assure you, in 96, when young 10-year-old Zachary Ramsey disappeared from an elementary school, and witnesses described seeing Bar-Jonah right there immediately, I assure you, this was initially, as I said, he wasn't brought to justice for years later. This was 96 when that young boy disappeared, despite having eyewitness statements of him at the scene. You'd figure that would be easy to solve, right? You got a kid diddling, homicidal, psychopathic, cannibalistic serial killer who's had numerous offenses, reoffended numerous times, and he's at the scene of this kid's disappearance. It doesn't get solved for 4 more years. There's a lot more going on in this tale, folks. That's all I'm saying. And the idea that, in 96, when Zachary Ramsey disappeared in a even smaller town of Great Falls, Montana, by the time I got there, it's certainly been growing ever since I was there. And when I first got there, when I say it was a smaller town beforehand, the main street, 10th Avenue South, was gravel road. This is the street, which it's a 4-lane road with a median intersection and gravel on both sides. And I don't know if it's because of the winter and it was easier to maintain or what, but this is the main drag through town, not the downtown Central Avenue, where that Hardee's was that Nathaniel Bar-Jonah worked at. And may or may not have served me human meat burgers, as the legend goes. This is the main strip from the airport down past the mall and leads you right into the Air Force Base. But, this is not a major town. I remember going to the ribbon cutting ceremony, for example. There was a ribbon cutting ceremony and they needed a rent-a-crowd, if you will. So a number of us who weren't doing anything on the Air Force Base that day were ordered to go down to the Applebee's downtown for the ribbon cutting ceremony. It was their first Applebee's. So another good example is, when they say some films are not available in all cities when they do nationwide release of, Hollywood films. I remember when The Next Friday came out, the sequel to Friday or whatever. And and didn't come to Great Falls, Montana. I don't even think it came to Montana. So this was not a large metropolitan area is what I'm getting at. And it's, despite it being on a major interstate, it is up near within hours of the Canadian border and not really, a good 10 hours north of Denver. So, and a good 7 hours north of Salt Lake. So it's up there. I mean, it's remote. It's remote. Again, much like Minot, North Dakota. But it is these matters that I think of the Satanic Panic that I'm trying to tackle in that Thursday series. And it's matters that seem to connect to a lot of things I discuss here at Operation GCD. But again, that ain't the only connection. So like I said, we got the Minot, Son of Sam kind of Minot business going on in their Process Church business from the Son of Sam and Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. We seemingly have strikingly similar cult activity perhaps going on in Great Falls, Montana, and around matters such as Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. And then again, Bar-Jonah came to Montana from the Bridgewater State Mental Hospital, where my old stalker, Buffalo Jared Revisa, may or may not sit today, right, after his homicidal transpocalypse, serial killer rampage across multiple states. Hypnotic mind control, in fact, right? From the family that helped win the World Series for the Chicago Cubs and break the curse of the GOAT, the famous Revisa sports hypnosis family. And I feel like there's probably more connections here because the more I think about, there we go. I learned of this tale, tonight's tale. I learned that is before I do that. So next Sundaze, as I said, we got the correlations we're going to discuss tonight between Minot and Great Falls. I don't know if I'm going to get much into the more Buffalo Jared Revisa stuff, but it is interesting. They both come from the Bridgewater State. Well, Nathaniel. Oh, I'm back. And Buffalo Jared Revisa sits in that same Bridgewater State Mental Hospital today, allegedly. I'd like to see proof. But next week's Sundaze, I'll be discussing the case of Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you'll have likely never heard of. Now, this man is perhaps the most diabolical serial killer that I've ever seen. Murdered folks across decades, documented and admitted and proven. The things that are not proven is what he did in between all those times where he's clearly seemingly, he's murdering folks in 1959, then he's murdering folks in 1996, and he's documented on murdering folks in the 60s and 1980, all crimes he admitted to before trying to get the death penalty. Well, I can assume that he committed a lot more crimes. And the man that did the seminal study on Edward Wayne Edwards and trying to bring out a lot of these other very occult ritualistic homicides that Edward Wayne Edwards was associated with and involved in over multiple decades. A friend of Charles Manson. In fact, those two met at the Chillicothe boys' reformatory school in Chillicothe, Ohio, built on a mound when they were children. Anyhow, they were also both at Boys Town, the infamous Boys Town in Nebraska. But it is the detective who, from Great Falls Police Department, who ultimately brought Nathaniel Bar-Jonah to justice. That was the detective who did the seminal study here into Edward Wynne Edwards. So this is a man who not only this is his FBI most wanted picture here. I decided to Muppetize him, as I do everyone else these days. But this is a man who, after getting out of prison for that stint as the FBI's most wanted, after justice caught up with him, for at least the bank robberies he was committing at that time, not necessarily the murders that apparently he committed, but he went on and committed a bunch more murders. He wrote a book about how the metamorphosis of a criminal, how he metamorphosized in prison, learned his ways, and is now a new man. He did that under a publishing house he set up and seemingly traveled the nation on various radio stations, TV interviews, lots of which are documented. And while doing these travels, seemingly committing murders in many of these cities. And even more diabolical than that, he would allegedly, it seems, infiltrate his way into folks' lives, frame them for murders, and doing so by working his way in as a fake doctor of psychiatry, etc. He also, apparently, in numerous instances, faked being a law enforcement officer in which to, get to his victims, which again is one of the details that John Cameron, the author that has gone into the seminal study here of Edward Wynne Edwards, asserts that he's the Zodiac Killer. Now, I'm not sure if that's the whole story, because I think the Zodiac Killer is possibly more of a ritualistic, you could call this again satanic murders. They do call themselves Satanism. However, I think it's more aptly described as some offshoot of Crowleyism, Thelema, that is. No different than Michael Aquino, the fellow I was just showing in Muppet form, and the infamous Temple of Set Church of Satan fellow, Colonel Michael Aquino. He himself a big fan of venerating Crowley. I'm not saying he's always in agreement with him, but if you read his writings, it's certainly a veneration and incorporation of his ideas in his own words. So while he calls himself a Satanist, there is that, obviously. So do that what you will. You call him what you want. Seems like it's a lot of ritual murder and hood rat shit, if you ask me. But nonetheless, Edward Wynne Edwards, the details given to the Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac killings, the man in the hood, the details he provided to the victim who survived, Brian Hartnell, I believe. Those details were actual details from the life of Edward Wynne Edwards. However, they didn't occur in August 69 when that occurred, or was that September 69? They had occurred 10 years prior in 59 when he was the number one most wanted man in America, or top 10 at least. I think he was number one. We'll go over that next week. But anyway, the guy who solves tonight's mysteries, or at least brought this man to justice in some respect, I would say not solve, because again, I just highlighted how there's a lot of details, and I'll be going over a lot more of those mysteries and details here tonight in the Patreon session of tonight's tales. But it is John Cameron, retired detective from Great Falls Police Department, who did bring Nathaniel Bar-Jonah to justice back there in 2000, the winter of 2000. I believe he was arrested in December. So, and it doesn't stop there, folks, because one more connection tangentially to other matters here at Operation GCD. I learned about all of these things relative, despite living in that town and possibly eating human meat burgers. Like I said, he was arrested in December of 2000. Well, at the time I was deploying to Saudi Arabia. I would not return until May of 2001. And I didn't hear anything about this in between. And it wasn't until I got back where anyone, where I was connected back into the community and whatnot to hear these things. But I'm back a day from Saudi Arabia. I'm standing in a grocery store when I see a Weekly World News. And that Weekly World News, the cover of it reads, Montana man serves kids up to a barbecue, to a church barbecue. And I know what you might be thinking, tabloids, those don't have real information. But I assure you, I opened up that page because I was said, I'm standing in Montana. I'm in Montana. I live in Montana. And I open up the page to the Weekly World News, and I start, going through it, and I see, oh, well, shoot, right there on the page of the story, it says, Great Falls, Montana's location. I said, no shit, I'm standing in Great Falls, Montana. So as that's going on, and I'm coming to terms with reading about these matters that, literally I just get back from Saudi Arabia for 4 months, 4+ months. And then I see that and I was like, oh, this is wild, So I'm reading it. So I'm just saying, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes there are true things in tabloids. And I say that to make this point because I have an occult and or esoteric review coming up next Wednesday, the 25th here in Operation GCD, of one of my favorite films, and that is So I Married an Axe Murderer. And I'll to plug that for a brief detour from tonight's tale, and just what I was thinking about, what was inside the mind of this particular garbage can dude as I'm reading that Montana man serves up kid at church barbecue from a Weekly World News article. This is the only thing that came to mind.
Hey, Mom, I find it interesting that you refer to the Weekly World News as the paper. The paper contains facts.
This paper contains facts. And this paper has the 8th highest circulation in the whole wide world. Right? Plenty of facts. Pregnant man gives birth. That's a fact. There it is, look. Here's this.
So that was so I Married an Axe Murderer, and I got that coming up next Wednesday, the 25th. But, it is an ongoing thing. Mike Myers' character there. He's been in the news recently in the Diddy trial, apparently connected to some sort of CIA activity. That seems interesting. But it is this character in the film that his mother is describing to him there, that there's a serial killer who's murdering her husbands, and that's the basis of that tale. So I Married an Axe Murderer. So in that story, those in that fictional tale there, yeah, of course, the there was truth there in the tabloids in Montana in May of 2001. Again, not only was there truth in the tabloid, it's where I learned about tonight's tale for the very first time. And this is it right here. We actually have some David Koresh stuff at the top. But towards the bottom of that cover of this Weekly World News from May, this was May, let me tell you the exact date here, folks. This was May something, give me a date, 22nd, 2001. And it says, Montana cannibal serves barbecue kid, quotes, to his neighbors. So sometimes you do find the truth inside some of these tabloids, because I found a lot of truth in that tabloid. Because obviously that was an interesting day in Great Falls, Montana for me once I had read that article. It wasn't on the 22nd. It was shortly thereafter, though, because I do recall it being just prior to Memorial Day weekend. And then I see these things and other matters I discussed here at Operation GCD, and I realize it's easy to discount, as I discounted in December. I would discount it too if I'd seen these things and all the information that comes out in this case. But in December 2022, this came out in the Idaho 4 murders case. New Manson cult butchered Idaho co-eds. And I've gone over this in Operation GCD Idaho 4 parapolitics shows here in the past. But long and the short of it is they do quote some sources in there, and there is claims around that. And ever since I have discovered these matters and what I like to call the Gooch factor, one of the lead detectives for the Idaho State Police, who has direct connections to that Manson murder there with the Sharon Tates and her friends back in August 9th, 1969. So it sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes you can find some information there in the tabloids that is valid, and it is the truth. So these aren't just crazy tales, seemingly wild tales, at least from my GCD adventures here. But the legends of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, they go deep. Like I said, possible extended cult activity. No one wants to hold this man accountable. He's diddling and murdering kids multiple decades in different places. And not unlike Edward Wayne Edwards there, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah would also frequently pose as a law enforcement officer, including wearing law enforcement uniforms and badges, etc. This would also, we've seen this actually recently in the assassination of those Minnesota politicians here in recent days. That individual also dressed as a law enforcement officer. The Green River Killer coming to mind, also notoriously dressed as a law enforcement officer. And also the Atlanta child killings. was often alleged early on in that task force that there was a white fella killing young black boys in and around Atlanta, 1979, 1980 there, dressed as a law enforcement officer. And the guy who brought Nathaniel Bar-Jonah to justice, Detective John Cameron, has well documented in his investigation of Edward Wayne Edwards that he was busted in 1983 at the home of a Marietta police sergeant just outside Atlanta. Marietta is part of that task force. Marietta police sergeant, for the arrest, the FBI arrested him there for arson because he burnt a home in Pennsylvania where him and his family had just fled. And in that home, not burn up, was a Marietta police sergeant's uniform. So I'm not saying it's definitive proof that Edward Wayne Edwards was the one, if not the primary or part of the team of the Atlanta child killings. But it does seem that John Cameron, the detective that brought Nathaniel Bar-Jonah to justice, did in fact document how Edward Wayne Edwards had a Marietta police sergeant's uniform, was in Atlanta at the time, and had been staying at a Marietta police sergeant's home, the place where he had been arrested in 83, despite that uniform being up in Pennsylvania at the home of that arson. So, you know, it is very interesting when it comes to these matters, but it is those matters in this kind of larger framework of a network that seems to appear not just in and around Edward Wayne Edwards, but, you know, that makes me wonder, how does Nathaniel Bar-Jonah do what he did and get out on the street? And we'll look at some of those details and some of those folks that are involved in that process, no pun intended, of, you know, allowing this homicidal, psychopathic, cannibalistic serial killer back on the streets, kid diddling serial killer back on the streets time after time to repeat offenders, right? To not track the man, to allow him to get to work at elementary school. Again, where's his family at? They live in the town. No one's making mention of this guy working at elementary school as a janitor at one point. Doesn't make a lot of sense, folks. Does not make a lot of sense at all. But this will be the conclusion here of our Patreon preview portion here of tonight's tale of the legends of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, who did in fact die in prison, allegedly of a heart attack or a blood clot, depending on the reports, back in 2008. So I can tell you one thing. The world's a better place, because I came face to face with Nathaniel Bar-Jonah back in the Cascade County Jail in 2001, and about 18 inches between our faces, some plexiglass in between, Hannibal Lecter style. And I'm not gonna lie to you, folks, I can assure you that was pure evil I saw in those eyes. So folks of the interwebs, I appreciate you joining me here tonight to get a little GCD, and hope you all can join us over there on the Patreon portions of the rest of this tale tonight or in the future. You hear this broadcast in the future, that is. And other than that, see you folks on actually Wednesday night this week. I got a Operation GCD Occult and Esoteric review of the film Ghost Story from 1981, written contemporary to the Son of Sam stuff back in 77, 78. The arrest of David Berkowitz, that is. Yet the author of this story that would later be adapted into a film a couple years later wrote a variety of aspects. He knew a lot of information about the whole Son of Sam thing looking back, right? At a time when he wrote this contemporary to the arrest of David Berkowitz. And he incorporated a lot of process church and stuff in there as well. So that's coming up this Wednesday night, Operation GCD Occult and Esoteric review of the film Ghost Story with the author John Mitchell and the Occult Rejects. So, and then next Wednesday, Occult and Esoteric review of So I Married an Axe Murderer. But again, don't miss out Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Times here, Eastern Daylight Times, wherever that works. The Anatomy of a Satanic Panic. Again, I won't be necessarily getting into the more infamous cases, but, you know, unpacking the narratives that got us here, how these matters still plague our society today, and incidents like, you know, even tonight would fall into this category of, you know, when we ignore these things, the problems don't go away. They just seem to evolve, and they evolve into giant 300-pound kid diddling, cannibalistic, psychopathic serial killers who, for decades, goes around jumping on kids' chests and murdering them and kid diddling them in the process. So, and that is Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. And he was caught numerous times, let go numerous times. And again, I think it is matters relative to that satanic panic where we can't quite resolve these issues in our society today. And I would argue, while there was actually a very generated panic around these topics, there was also a series of ritual homicidal maniacs, not unlike Nathaniel Bar-Jonah or Edward Wayne Edwards, going around American folks. You can say it for Satan, you can say it's for Thelema, whatever their value systems is. It's a ritual, it's a cult, and it all falls under this broader term of satanic murders and the associated satanic panic. So I'm not saying there wasn't a panic, because there was a generated panic to cause folks to dispel any actual serious thought processes or, consideration that this is a larger problem plaguing our society. Until we address it, it ain't going anywhere. So folks of the interwebs, I'll leave you there on that note. And folks of the interwebs joining me on the Patreon side, I'll see you over there momentarily. And I apologize if I couldn't keep up with the chat there, but trying to keep this narrative, and I appreciate y'all joining me here, and catch you next time.
Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Boom!